A theme of this year's driver transfers has been the fact that not many Formula 2 drivers have even been part of the rumours or conversations for a Formula 1 seat. Guan Yu Zhou has been the only driver who seems to have a chance of getting a seat from this category, given he has a reported €30 million in sponsorship backing. But if he does make the leap into Formula 1, he will be the only F2 driver to make that move this year. So is the best talent in Formula 2 set to miss out on Formula 1 again because of money? Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. The Formula 2 grid has some talented juniors in 2021. It's a competitive field which contains a number of drivers that I expect will make it to Formula 1. However, as more seats close for 2022, it looks like most of these young talents won't make that jump to the pinnacle of motorsport for 2022. This video will look at why this is the case this year, and in particular whether the most talented drivers, such as Oscar Piastri, are missing out on those seats despite being ready for Formula 1. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, then please leave a like and consider subscribing to Behind the Drive. The best talent in Formula 2. Formula 2 is the main pathway to Formula 1. Of the 15 drivers who made their debut in the sport since 2017, 13 of these have raced in either GP2 or Formula 2 at some stage in their careers. It was only Lance Stroll and Pietro Fittipaldi that didn't compete in a series at that level. So it's quite clear that if you want to get into Formula 1, you need to come through these ranks. However, this season, that step looks further away for those drivers racing in Formula 2. Now, of course, you can't have a constant stream of drivers coming through into Formula 1. Otherwise, we'd see a huge flow of drivers not being given the time to prove themselves in the category. And it's true that this season does have 3 rookies that graduated from F2 last season, but this year is slightly different. The current leader of the championship is Oscar Piastri, a 20-year-old Australian driver who's the reigning Formula 3 champion. If the Prema driver manages to win this season, then he would join a small group of particularly talented drivers who've won both Formula 3 and Formula 2 or equivalent titles back to back. These include the likes of George Russell, Charles Leclerc, Nico Hülkenberg and Lewis Hamilton. All of those drivers made their way into Formula 1 the following year after their success was recognised. But for Piastri this looks significantly less likely, and there are 3 reasons for this. First is the fact that it still remains unclear whether Piastri will end up being the eventual title winner. Following the shortened round in Russia, Piastri has extended his lead at the top of the standings by 21 points. But based on the way the F2 season has been structured in 2021 and how competitive it has been for a few drivers at the front, it's far from a foregone conclusion. When the majority of F1 teams made their decisions on their driver lineup for the new regulations in 2022, it was summer, and at this time only half the season had been completed. This was also significantly spread out across the Formula 1 season, so there hadn't been the same interaction between the F1 and F2 paddocks that we've become used to over the years. So if a Formula 1 team wanted to make their decision earlier in the season, which it seems like the majority did this time around, then selecting a driver from the Formula 2 talent pool would be a risk. Sure, the likes of Piastri, who won Formula 3 last year, will be well on his way towards achieving a super license, and is almost certainly going to be eligible following this season. But winning the title would ensure that he's proven that he's Formula 1 ready. The second reason Piastri's Formula 1 prospects are particularly limited is because of Alpine. The Australian driver is a member of the Alpine Driver Academy, and it's great that he has backing from a manufacturer team. However, as I've mentioned in other videos before, the Alpine Driver Academy is probably the worst to be a part of. Renault supplies just one team with engines, and as such, Alpine want the 2 strongest drivers possible in those seats, to ensure they can be successful. It means that the team doesn't have much leverage to try and get one of their junior drivers into another setup, and this is particularly difficult this year. For the first time in a while, the Alpine Academy has some of the strongest talents in Formula 2, and so there are a number of drivers vying for the no so-called pathway seats on the F1 grid. Thinking about a couple of those drivers I mentioned earlier that did win F3 and F2 back-to-back, Charles Leclerc got his opportunity with Sauber, who had power units from Ferrari, and George Russell had 3 years in a Mercedes-powered Williams before moving up to the works team for next season. So for these drivers, they got that opportunity straight after winning in Formula 2. For Piastri, he needs, as most rookies do, an opportunity to join a smaller team to cut his teeth on the Formula 1 grid in a similar way. But this is incredibly difficult to do unless you have significant financial backing in this day and age. Which leads me to the third reason that Piastri is at a disadvantage when it comes to finding a Formula 1 seat, and that is a question of money. Earlier this year, Lewis Hamilton criticised Formula One for becoming a billionaire boys' club, with the likes of Latifi, Stroll and Mazepin all coming into the sport with significant financial backing. Hamilton added that if he was coming through the ranks today, he wouldn't be able to break into Formula One. And I agree that for drivers who don't have a certain level of financial backing, the situation is pretty bleak. When Hamilton was joining the sport, he was supported by McLaren, but during that era he was given the opportunity to test a Formula One car as much as he and the team wanted. But today, in the cost-saving world of Formula One, Piastri has had just a handful of laps in an older Formula One car, which will have offered him very limited knowledge and understanding. This is part of a more general issue, but that's only the half of it when it comes to funding for the likes of Oscar Piastri. The other side of things is the sponsorship backing. There are rumours that Piastri's fellow Alpine Academy junior, Guan Yu Zhou, has around €30 million worth of sponsor backing. Of course, this figure is contested by those involved and it could well be lower, but there's no doubt that any significant form of financial backing from bringing a driver in would be quite attractive to a smaller team. It's fine margins between Zhou and Piastri in the F2 Championship at the moment, but it's worth noting that the two drivers have vastly different experience levels from their time in the category, with Zhou in his third season and Piastri a rookie in that category. So objectively, and taking finances out of the equation, if you were picking one of these two, you would surely want Piastri. But it seems like the Australian driver was out of the silly season conversations entirely. Formula One is changing. Alongside the struggles for drivers in Formula 2 to promote themselves and back themselves, there is a changing landscape in the world of Formula 1. This year has seen the introduction of the budget cap, which has created some challenges for the teams in terms of budgeting for crash damage. Generally speaking, and I don't have the statistics for this but would love to see it, less experienced drivers in Formula 1 have more crashes and accidents than the more senior drivers. The reasons for this are clear. More experience mean you learn the limits of your car and know how to get closer to them without going beyond what it's capable of. For a rookie, you might not be so familiar with that core car control aspect such as the performance of the tyres, which often change from one session to the next. So as a result of this budget cap, there could have been a tendency for teams to want more experienced drivers in their cars, as opposed to selecting rookie drivers to move up from Formula 2. We've seen this year how much crash damage has been caused by the rookies in particular. Even Yuki Tsunoda said in a press conference that he was surprised to have been kept on with AlphaTauri for 2022, given the amount of damage he's caused and his performance across the season so far. So it's all of a sudden become more important for the teams to value experience. You also need to consider the fact that Formula 1 is changing for next year with the new regulations. So once again, there are challenges here, with the fact that the teams will want experience to support them through the early development stage of these new cars. If they receive comprehensive feedback that they can trust following the pre-season testing sessions from both of their drivers, then they'll be far more likely to set out on the right development path for their season. And this will also be crucial from an aerodynamic perspective next year. This season has seen the teams switching their focus, but next year will see the teams continuing to develop their cars based on the following year's regulations. So that development race will be fascinating to watch once again. But all of these factors mean it's far less likely that a team would choose a less experienced driver, in order to save as much of their budget as possible to ensure they can spend that on developing the car and improving their team's performance. You could argue that this is nothing new, but certainly for the larger teams, the introduction of a budget cap has placed them in a completely new financial situation, which is likely to exacerbate these issues. Does Formula 1 have a longer term issue? So this brings me on to the question of whether this is an issue that needs solving. We've seen the fact that the doors into Formula 1 are being slammed shut if the drivers don't have any financial backing, more than those that have some billionaire support. We've also seen the fact that changes to the Formula 1 regulations in terms of the budget cap and the regulation change on the horizon reduces the likelihood of teams selecting their junior drivers. But really, there isn't that much that can be done about this. The only element that stops a driver from being brought into a Formula 1 team at the moment is the super license structure. This is in place to prevent drivers that don't have the right level of talent or experience from getting onto the Formula 1 grid. But is this enough? There are clearly some drivers that are paying for their C, and some of these spent a long time in Formula 2 doing okay but not exceptionally well, which allowed them to build up those qualifying points over time. So maybe there needs to be a criteria change to ensure the most talented drivers continue to have their opportunities. But at the same time, a change like this would be so artificial, and it could be a negative move for the sport. For me though, the fact that a driver who could well win Renault Eurocup, Formula 3 and Formula 2 in back-to-back-to-back seasons is not in the running for a Formula 1 seat is a crazy thought. What more could Oscar Piastri do to prove his ability? I fear that if he ends up winning the F2 title this season, and then therefore becomes ineligible for that category, he will be another driver that fails to break into Formula 1, and will likely end up as a test or reserve driver for Alpine next year. This is a step that no driver would want to take, as it would potentially see him forgotten about when the driver market rolls around again in advance of the 2023 season. It wouldn't be the first time that a driver couldn't make a step up to F1 straight away. Gasly did the same after his GP2 win in 2016, but Piastri is clearly one of the most talented juniors out there, so I doubt it will be long until a team offers him the opportunity to get into Formula 1, where he undoubtedly belongs. Certainly, if I was working for the likes of Mercedes, Ferrari or Red Bull, I'd be considering swooping in and giving him that chance he deserves. What do you think? Is Formula 1 becoming a billionaire boys club? Should there be measures against it? Or are pay drivers a necessary evil? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, then you'll definitely enjoy this video about the last driver who won Formula 2 but never made it to Formula 1.